Got it. So you had enough experience where you knew where the line was, and you knew that you were getting close to it, and you could turn around before you got there, which we talk about that all the time. It's like that's one of the big issues with rescues in the whites is that people don't know when they've crossed the line because they don't have the experience to know that they've, sometimes somebody breaks a leg, and that is what it is. But a lot of times when people get in trouble, like they've crossed a line, they don't realize it because they've never been in that area, they've never been in that situation, and they get in trouble. But you've been there, done that, which is a huge advantage.
Well, that's the thing. Like the river crossings were new for me, and like the presidentials in the winter were new. I'd never been in the Prezi in the winter, but pretty much. I mean, I had been on a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. I'd been on a blizzard on Gio before. Like I've been in blizzards in the Adirondacks before. I camped out below -20 in the Adirondacks before. Like I had done a bunch of stuff before in these conditions. So I knew I knew where my comfort zone was, and I knew I had a good gauge on all that stuff. Yeah. I didn't take any of it lightly. And when I felt like I needed to turn around, I turned around, Katahdin, whenever I needed to. I was like, this is a bad situation.
This is a great bookend because we spent a good number of episodes in the last several months talking about a lot of these principles, and your tale really just sort of wraps up everything that we've been preaching for the last several episodes, like in one nice gift wrapped box.
I think it's important to know those limits, and to me it goes back to it's experience, and it goes back to the comparison thing too, right? Like if I was going up Katahdin, and if my mindset getting towards the summit was, but like, what if you didn't do it? Or what will people say if you didn't summit? Or comparing myself to some idea of a perfect through hike, I could have let that voice be louder than the voice in my head that was saying like, this summit isn't for you today. Like, turn around, right? And I just think it's important to honor our limits, right?
Broadcasting from the Woodpeckers Studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stomp.
I believe we are ready.
All right, episode 58. So
58.
Welcome, Stomp. Welcome, Scott.
How you doing, Mike?
Hello.
Hey, Scott.
Hi.
Fresh off the trail. That's pretty epic. We have quite the show for everybody tonight.
Yes, very exciting. So I'm just double checking, Stomp. I have my Audacity recording here, and then I've got the other recording done so that we can get Scott's audio. So I am not going to screw any technology up today, I swear.
Why would you say that?
Because I'm sensitive about that shit.
Okay. Are we going to talk about your solo debut this weekend?
Just get it over with. And let's move on to the next topic.
Well, it's sort of interesting. The last episode with Christina from Rockhopper, we had technical difficulties with her at the very end, so people may have noticed that. And then we released that episode on Saturday, and when I woke up, I'm looking at YouTube, and much to my surprise, I see 2 episode 57s up there. So I click on the first one. It sounds great. It's like the usual routine. And then I click on the second one, and it's like blank for maybe a few minutes. And then all of a sudden it's Mike. And I scroll a little further forward, and it's Mike. And I scroll towards the end, and it's Mike. So it was just Mike's audio track that he had uploaded.
Yeah. So, and Scott, and for the audience listening, basically what we do is, so we're on like this video squadcast system. So Stomp is recording his audio isolated on his computer. Mm-hmm. I'm recording my audio isolated on my computer, and then we've got Scott through the Squadcast system, and we'll actually be recording his video isolated as well. And then Stomp does some kind of magic with audio. I don't know what he does, but he takes all 3 of those tracks, puts them together, and then puts music on them, does whatever. And then he sends me the final file, and then I then upload it to our podcast platform thing, this thing called Libsyn. But unfortunately, because we were like a day late, and I had just gone hiking with my daughter, and I was like trying to get that stupid Starlink that I talked about set up in Maine, and it took too long, and it was a whole thing. So I got home at like 9 o'clock, and unfortunately, when I uploaded the audio, I uploaded the original file of just me.
Right.
On the podcast, so it sucks. It was embarrassing, but anyway, I deleted it. Scott, it will not happen on this one. I understand, like, you're a big hiking celebrity here. I don't want to mess it up.
No, that would be kind of funny.
So for the 111 special listeners that got to hear Mike's solo debut, consider yourselves lucky, because that's a very unique treat.
It's like a preview of like when I'm cooking dinner at night and I'm talking to myself. It was just basically like that. So.
Oh my goodness!
All right, so enough of that. We're never going to speak of it again. Next topic.
Yeah, well, apparently the air raid siren is scaring the hell out of listeners. So people are like pulling over on the side of the road to let police by, and like dropping their plates. As they're doing the dishes, they hear the siren and they're freaking out. So sorry about that. I still think it's super cool, and little behind the scenes that's sort of the alarm that I get when there's an actual mission, and apparently some other search and rescue folks use the same thing, and it scares the hell out of me too. So anyway, sorry for the fright.
Moving on. All right, and Stomp. Now you want to talk about the Kentucky Derby?
Oh yeah,
I didn't watch it this year.
Yeah, Scott, have you heard about this? The Run for the Roses, Kentucky Derby.
I know what it is, but I haven't heard of like the recent one. No.
It's worth mentioning.
Dude, he's been hiking to get rid of that stuff. He doesn't want to deal with it. I
suppose. Yeah. I mean, there are some stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I can imagine. But this just happened over the weekend. Rich Strike was a horse that was not even slated to run the race, and there was a scratch of another horse, so there was an actual opening that opened up for this horse to come in, and it was in 21st place, and the odds of this horse winning was something like 88-1 or something of that nature, just astronomical odds. And this horse pulled it out, and the video is absolutely stunning. If you haven't seen it, you got to watch it, because it's once in a lifetime type of event. No, it's amazing, because this. Yeah. I mean, it was part jockey. The jockey just maneuvered right to the pack, but then to watch this horse muscle its way through the entire pack and win is just unbelievable. So highly recommended. You got to see it. Who knows if it'll happen over the next 2 races? I mean, it may have been a fluke, but I don't know. It was awesome.
Yeah. The only thing I did see was I saw a video on... I saw a TikTok video of the horse. What's the name of the horse again?
Rich Strike.
Rich Strike. So apparently, I don't know anything about horses. I did have a friend who his father owned horses, and they raced horses. So we would go to Rockingham every once in a while. But this what I did see was that the horse after the race, I guess that some of these horses, not all of them, but they're fired up, and I don't know if they're in their warrior mentality or something like that, but they need to, they call it ponying them down. So they'll have a special pony and another jockey type person, but not like the little jockeys, the big guys, and they'll bring a pony up next to the horse to calm it down. And this horse was biting the other pony, and it was biting the other handler, and the other handler, I guess, had to punch the horse to say calm down. But a lot of the people are mad because they're saying that you shouldn't punch the horse because you got him all riled up to run the race, and other people that's just how horses are handled. So I don't know what goes on with them, but it was interesting.
Yeah, that was an interesting video. Yeah. So we'll see what happens with the other 2 races.
Yep. Yeah. So Stomp, you got the rest of these openers here. I didn't even read this article that you posted.
Yeah. I skimmed it, and I'm just going to refer people to it because it's a really neat article about the mountain stewards, not just here in New Hampshire, but in Maine and New York. And it actually goes into sort of their history, how they started, how it was sort of like an outgrowth of fire wardens and things like that. So we'll give you the link and you can check it out. And, we always want to say thanks to the stewards that are doing such a great job educating hikers as they enter the trails, making sure they're prepared. And not only that, but just, assisting in maintaining trails and everything. It's a great article. So we'll share that with everybody.
Yeah, I'll try to find out. I don't know when the Trailhead Steward Program starts in the Whites. I would have to think like after Memorial Day is typically when I will see them.
Yeah.
But I will reach out to a couple of people that have messaged me about that program before and see when they start their program.
Okay, sounds good. And they're always looking for help too, by the way. So.
Yeah, you got to go through the formal training, and the training program started, I think it was in like early April.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you can like go outside of that cycle, but I do know that I had heard from somebody, because we had given it a plug, somebody had followed up and said that they had their biggest crowd ever for the program. Yeah. So hopefully they'll have a lot of people out there. I think they do like 6 or 7 trailheads. And for people that aren't clear on this, so the Trailhead Steward Program in the White Mountains is basically, they'll typically set up at busy trailheads. So I know that they do Champney Falls. They set up on Falling Waters,
Appalachia, maybe
Appalachia, and then Amanusic, Well Sticky, and then there's probably 1 or 2 more that I'm missing. And what they'll do is just sort of, they're there to educate. So they'll check hikers in, and they'll let them know about the trail conditions. They'll talk about the 10 essentials. They'll talk about other safety. They'll make sure that people have water and all these other provisions that they might need in order to not get themselves in trouble on the trail. So it's a good program. And Stomp had sent over an article talking about the history about this program, not in the Whites, but in the Adirondacks as well as Maine.
I was going to say that I've seen it in the Adirondacks, stewards at trailheads and such. So
yeah. Do you typically do you stop and talk to them, or do you do what I do and I try to avoid them? And I just don't feel like talking to anybody.
I'll stop and chat, but if they're chatting with somebody, usually I just end up scooting by.
Yeah, that's my move too. I'll wait till a crowd gets there, and then I slide past them. Yeah. So, but anyway, most people, you should talk to them. I'm just antisocial. So
now for donations, we have Rhonda E. Donated 3 coffees, and she was the one that actually brought this comment about the siren, air raid siren. So touche. Thank you, Rhonda, very much. And a quick shout out to at Rek-lis Brewing, where you'll enjoy the best food, craft beer, and fun just 15 minutes from Franconia Notch, many 4,000 footers in less than 10 minutes from the 5 corners. Check them out.
That's it?
That is it.
That's all we got. All right, so we're going into the
Fast and
show
Furious
summary here. So, yeah, exactly. So welcome to Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, episode 58. Tonight we are joined by Aquaman, Scott Benerofe. So he's literally fresh off the trail, having completed a southbound trek of the Appalachian Trail. And many people complete the AT every year, but very few complete this trail starting southbound in winter. So this is an incredibly difficult feat, given the weather, the logistics, the gear, and the terrain challenges that one must overcome to succeed. So tonight, Scott will share his journey, and we'll dive into everything that it took to get through probably the northern part of the trail, and then we'll talk a bunch about sort of his history in hiking and really dive into it. So we're excited. So all of this, and then we're going to dive into some recent hiking stories. So Stomp did a big bushwhack out to the Captain, and I had a trip up to Kearsarge North, so we'll talk about those, and then we'll wrap up with some updates on the current forest road statuses in the Whites, and then some recent search and rescue news. There's been a few rescues to go over. So I'm Mike.
And I'm Stomp. Let's get started.
All right. So beer talk here. So Scott, we didn't even prep you, but typically we'll have a beer or a drink or water, whatever you want.
Yeah.
Stomp, you drinking anything good tonight, Stomp?
Yes, I had. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
Stomp sounds like Scott. Sorry. I just have water. I just have water.
You get water. Okay. Perfect.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
I had actually a donation from family tonight. So I just want to thank Craig and Dolls down at Spinner's Pizza down in Ballard Vale, actually Andover. Spinner's is a family business. And Craig sent along a 4-pack of St. Bernardus, which is sort of funny. It is a Belgian Abbey Ale, and boy, it's really good. It's a very rich beer for sure, and it's 10% alcohol, which is always a good thing for me. Here's you'll find it, Mike. Here's what it looks like: St. Bernardus.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, very nice. So it's like
It's
a one and done
glass
type of thing.
bottle.
Oh yeah, it's super rich. I sent a picture of this one to Steve, Rek-lis Steve, and he was like, "Oh, that's one of my favorites." So check it out; it's very good. And you?
I have a double IPA from Frost Beer Works. It's called Lush. So my brother-in-law was up. We had a little gathering for Mother's Day yesterday, and my brother-in-law came up. So it's 8% alcohol. So I may be wrecked by the end of this show because I'm not a big drinker. I literally only drink during the podcast. So once a week, I'll have a beer.
Yeah. So Scott, we may be passed out, and you may be running this show a little later.
I got it clear as can be right here, just water. Yeah.
Exactly. Awesome. All right, so now we're gonna get into some recent hikes. So Stomp, I think you want me to go first? Or do you want to go first?
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so I got out, had a busy weekend. So Friday I had I've talked about this before, but the company I work at, we have these wellness days every 2 months, which is great. So you just take a Friday off and do what you want. So
yeah.
Took my daughter up to, we didn't want to do a 4,000 footer because she just didn't feel like spikes and ice and all that stuff. So she's like, let's just do something a little bit lower. So I was like, we have to go to the house in Maine, so I was like, let's find something close to the North Conway area. So it came down to South Moat, North Moat, or Kearsarge North. So we ended up taking the trip up to Kearsarge North, which was perfect.
Yeah.
So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's the mountain that's right next to Mount Cranmore. It almost looks like a perfect pyramid, and it's got a nice big fire tower on top of it.
Yeah. Any crowds?
No crowds. There was one car in the parking lot when we got there around 9:45, 10 o'clock in the morning. There was one car in the lot. And then we got up there. That gentleman was coming down as we hit the backside. We were probably about a mile from the peak. And then we had the whole summit to ourselves for about an hour. We got up there and we saw it in the book that Eric Todd had been the last person up there, so he signed the book, and then we were able to sign the book. But anyway, Eric Todd Sweet was up there right before us, so he had written in the book that he had been up there the night before, and then we got there the next morning and signed the book.
Yeah, that's neat.
And then, as we were heading down, there was a little bit of ice on the backside, so there's still a little bit of ice on the 3,000 foot range is where it starts. Yeah, and then from there we were just able to bypass it all. We didn't need spikes or anything. And then we had awesome views. Yeah. Not as epic as the day that me and you went up there when we had the undercast, but it was still pretty awesome.
Yeah, I've never seen an undercast like that.
Yeah.
360 degrees. It was amazing.
Yeah. But if you are looking for a good, it's not an easy hike, but it's not that difficult. It's just a steady, it doesn't change. It's just a steady up. It's about 2,200 feet of elevation gain. You go from 800 feet, and it's like 2,400. So you go from 800 feet up to about 3,200, and it's got nice views on the ledges. It's got a little bit of a challenge on the backside with the ice that was there, but overall it's a pretty straightforward hike with an awesome fire tower. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. So what about you? You and Mark went out for some big adventure.
Yeah, hit the Captain. The Captain is a really remote crag just for the listeners, and it's nestled in between the Hancocks and Mount Carrigain. It's not for the faint of heart, I guess, in terms of the bushwhacking portion of it. What was really interesting was we drove down all the way to the end of Sawyer River Road where Hancock Notch Trail starts, and you park there. And
so the gate's open. The initial gate off of 302 is open.
Correct. Right. Okay. And it was sparse, man. There was nobody up there. I was very surprised. No cars. On the way out, we saw maybe half a dozen cars at some of the lots, Signal Ridge in particular. But it was a fun adventure. I mean, Mark is such a trooper. I really have to hand it to him. He was down. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it out. Because he had heard some of the rumors and things and some of my previous stories. And I was really actually sort of reluctant to go. I wanted to do something to sort of reset my psychology and my mind about getting back into some bigger hikes. And like that one, I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? You know what I mean? Like, do I want to do this hike? Like, you guys see this shiner here? I'm shredded from the bushwhack. Like, my arms are shredded, bruised. It's brutal. Oh yeah, I mean, my arms are. Look at it. The guys at work today were like, "Did you walk through like barbed wire or something?" And the kid goes to me at work, like, "Why didn't you bring a what do they call it? What are the things you cut down?
Long sleeves?
No, it's too hot for long sleeves. What do those bushwhackers use? The blades or whatever.
Machete.
You can't use a machete because you're on a 60-degree grade and you're pulling yourself up by tree, so you can't hold onto a machete. It's impossible. So anyway, you get chewed up. But it was a fun trip. You know, it's like we packed the bikes, and what you do is when you park your truck or your car at the end of the Sawyer River, you take the North Fork, and it's literally 50 yards away from the parking lot. And from there, what we did was we rode our mountain bikes straight to more or less the beginning of what you would consider a trail, but it's a combination of trail, herd path, maybe old logging or carriage road. I'm not quite sure. Interestingly enough, somebody's been pruning and clearing the trail. So the trail itself that leads you to the Captain, which is perhaps about maybe 2 miles before you start to hit the Strainer Brooks. It's like dozens of brooks, and that's where the bushwhack starts. The trail was fantastic. It was so easy to follow. It was amazing. And then from there, we made the bushwhack up in, I think, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. Hit the summit. There was trace snow, but mostly ice on the call between Carrigain and the summit cone of the Captain, which is 3,500 feet for the Captain. And what you have to do is you can either go up the climber's route, which is rock scramble. We ditched that idea because of the ice. We ended up coming down that way, which is crazy, but we ended up going on the north side, which was a bit snowier and icy, and that was, oh my God, it was wild. So good time. If you're into an adventure and you want to get some bushwhacking skills, that is the place, man. It's just crazy in there. I think I might have to go out one more time with Mason sometime soon. But yeah, that was my trip. So I'm like running on fumes right now. I'm sort of beat.
Yeah, that sounds crazy. So you at the point where you've gone out there so much now that it's not hard for you to just find your way. You're taking the same route pretty much every time now.
It's not the same. It's the same route in terms of the trail portion, but the second you hit the brooks, which is essentially at the base of the cliff itself, then it's bushwhack. I mean, there is no like same route, but it's a rough ballpark area. It's refined to the point where I'm avoiding the pitfalls and the traps because there are dozens of traps in that area. You can get sucked into these massive gullies that are just a nightmare, or thick sections of bramble, or the thick dead trees that cut you up. I don't know. It's getting easier every time. This time was interesting. We actually followed one of the brooks primarily up to the base of the ledges themselves, and then we started shading right, and it brought us right up really quickly. So it was actually pretty cool. A little sketchy following the brook all the way up. It was, I don't know, on average maybe a foot of water running.
Okay.
Yeah. But And as time goes on with the warmer weather, those brooks dry up quite a bit, so it'd be even easier. What's funny about those brooks, unlike a lot of the places in the Whites where the rocks are super slippery, these brooks and streams are super tractionable, I guess. This great grip. Yeah, it's really funny.
Are there any views up there? Like every time I see you guys post pictures, it's just like you're surrounded by trees. Can you see anything?
You can see the Captain when you're maybe about a mile out from hitting the base of the cliff itself. And then there's a climbers camp just to the southeast where there is a slide, maybe 100-foot high slide that you can ascend and then get advantage as well. But that's it. There's only 2 or 3 viewpoints. And then it's all shrouded by tree up top.
Well, I think I'll cheer you guys on. I like views.
Oh, by the way, there is another view actually that you can access on the way down, which is a southerly view. So you get this great view of Tri-Pyramid, North Tri from the west all the way over to Chicora. So you get that whole stretch. So you see Passaconaway, Whiteface, the whole thing. It's great. So from those mountains, actually, I mean, the legend was that you could only see the Captain from like Potash, but that's not true. You can see it from Chicora all the way over to the Tri-Pyramids if you're looking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations, and
Thanks,
maybe side joke a little bit, but so you told me there was no bugs out,
none,
and that
60 degrees, beautiful.
Snowpack wasn't bad at all.
Not
up
bad.
There, so
I think it's similar to what you experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's my story. Right. I'm sticking to it.
Very good. All right, so we're on to you, Scott. This is your moment. You ready?
Oh, hold on a minute. Back up. We have a notable hike. We have a notable hike.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, we got tagged by a listener, A Folsom 33, and it was an overnight on Chicora. So thank you for tagging us, and that is Slasher's notable hike of the week. Super cool pictures, too.
Where did they stay? Did they stay at the cabin?
No, it looked like they were just right on the summit. Yeah, they were cowboy camping, I believe. Yeah, based upon the pictures.
You know what? I think I saw that. I think that they stayed at the cabin and then went back up there. Mm-hmm. They just sat up there in their sleeping bags for the sunrise.
Yeah, super cool.
So
thanks for
which I think if the listeners are. I get this question occasionally from people, like where the best sunrises are. Chicora is definitely got to be like top 3, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it is special.
Yeah, because there's nothing blocking it.
I've done sunrise on Chicora. It's beautiful.
Yeah, like there's nothing blocking. There's no other mountains blocking anything. So when you get up there, it's just you catch the sunrise. It's amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
and you watch it hit everything behind you. But you can see the whole sunrise.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
It's always awesome. Cold, too. Even in the warmer months.
Yeah, remember we did it with Jimmy and it was like tough. Like we came up Champney Falls, and it was like 3 a.m. or something.
Sure,
what the hell are we doing here?
Yeah, that's always a challenge that early in the morning, and you're like, we can't miss it. So there's that pressure. Get up there.
Awesome. All right. Are you going to interrupt me, or can we talk to Scott now?
I think we're good. Let's move on to the star of the show.
It's time for Slasher's Guest of the Week. Very cool. Very cool.
All right. So, Stomp, I guess I'll start, and then Scott will ask you to introduce yourself. But so, do you prefer to go by Aquaman or Scott?
Either one. You can call me Scott. Scott's easy.
Okay, got it. So Scott, so we had first heard of you. I think that. So the reason we have Scott here is that he just completed a southbound AT hike where he started in the winter, which almost no one has done. I think the only person I'm aware of that's done this is the Hiking Viking, and then our friends Arlette and Rich had attempted it a couple of years ago and had got hit with like such incredible snow that they weren't able to make. I think that they had to go around the Mahoosics, and then eventually life happened, and I think they had to bail out sometime in Massachusetts or something like that. But you do hear about people talking about doing it occasionally, but I think we first became aware of you. You had already made it through the 100-mile wilderness and were plowing through the Mahoozics and down through New Hampshire. So we've been keeping an eye on your progress throughout the entire hike, and lo and behold, you made it all the way down to Georgia. So we want to definitely have you on to talk a little bit about your adventure, and we'll talk about all kinds of stuff around gear and getting through Maine and New Hampshire in the winter and all that stuff. But I guess maybe to start off with, could you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about sort of your background, how you initially got into hiking, and then we'll talk a little bit about your first through hike, and then talk about the most recent one.
Right. So first off, thanks for having me on. This is really fun. It's awesome to meet both of you. So thank you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we're glad to have you.
Yeah. And so Scott Benerofe, I'm 26 years old. I'm from New Jersey, which is where I am now. And I went to school in Boston. I went to Northeastern. And before the hike, I was living in Concord, New Hampshire. So the whites are no stranger to me. I thru hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2019. I did a northbound March to July. I thru hiked the Vermont Long Trail northbound in 2016 in July. I've done the Northeast 111, so I've done all the 4,000 footers in the Northeast. And I grew up. We have a cabin in the Adirondacks. My family, I've had it for decades, so I grew up going up there. And I really got into outdoorsy stuff at a very young age, going to summer camp up there. And then I really got into backpacking and hiking. 6 years ago was the first time I ever went backpacking in my life. And then I had this idea in my head before I'd ever gone backpacking that I wanted to do the AT. And I'd been getting into hiking, day hiking and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I figured, well, I ought to learn how to backpack first. I bought all the gear, just started going after it. And my third backpacking trip ever was the Long Trail. And then I did all the 46ers in the Adirondacks. And then I did the AT. I started getting into winter backpacking and hiking. And then I found myself on the AT this winter.
Got it. And then when you were in college, were you were heading up during college to do hikes as well?
Yeah, I was actually not heading to the Whites or Maine. I was heading to the Adirondacks to hike because I was really intent on doing the 46 for some reason. And I also knew I wanted to do the AT, and I had this idea in my head of like seeing the Whites in Maine for the first time on foot from Georgia, and I just thought that would be amazing. So the first time I stood on Moosalok was the first time I ever really been in the Whites, and I'd walked from Georgia. It was on my thru hike in 2019. It was incredible.
Wow. So that's interesting. So you were in college and you knew, like, you got the bug when you were in college. Mm-hmm. Did you, obviously you're in Northeastern. What did you study at Northeastern?
I was a mechanical engineering graduate.
Mechanical engineering. So you did at least one co-op, maybe two co-ops at Northeastern. Mm-hmm. So you get a little bit of work. Did you have to work in between so you did the Long Trail in 2016 and then the AT in 2019. Were you working in between that, or were you in school the whole time?
Yeah, the Long Trail was a summer break during school. I had 2 months off, and I took 3 weeks and did the Long Trail. Then I finished school. I worked my schedule around so I would graduate in December, so I could northbound the AT right after I graduated. And that's what I ended up doing. Graduated December 2018. March 2019, I was in Georgia, heading north. And then I got a job working for a couple of years. That's when I moved to New Hampshire. And then in October, I left that position, applied to grad school, and came out here. So I'm going to grad school. I start this summer up in Burlington, Vermont.
Oh, perfect. Great. Now, so you had already done the Long Trail. So the 2019 AT northbound you were no stranger to backpacking at that point.
Right. That first 3 weeks of the trail felt more familiar, and it was a little easier for me to get my legs underneath me, I felt, just because I'd already put 300 miles on them during like a mini thru hike sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, that was the AT was my first like bigger long trail.
Yeah. Did you feel like when you hit the trail in 2019, did you feel like you were pretty well dialed in with your gear, or did you learn some new things based on being in the, having to go on a longer hike than the Long Trail?
I definitely ended up learning a lot on the AT, but that initial, like you're saying, that initial week or two, I felt a lot more dialed. I did a lot of my fumbling around on the Long Trail. Like, I mean, my name's Aquaman because I carried 7.5 liters onto the long trail of water.
I was wondering about that.
Which is funny because that trail has a reputation like you can't go anywhere without like stepping in a puddle of water.
Well, it was so funny because I've also on my back, and the hike up from North Adams, you're in Massachusetts, and so you hit Vermont. There's a river, and then there's like a spring, and it's like, and then Vermont's soaking wet, right? And so I got all this water. It was so funny, but it's a mistake you make one time, and it's easy. You just dump it all out. So.
Yeah, exactly.
What a riot.
And with your gear in 2019, how heavy was your pack that you were carrying?
My base weight was like 12 to 14 pounds on the trail. I added a few things as I went on, but it started around like 12 or 13 pounds. So I was pretty light going onto the AT just because I felt comfortable with the cold weather that we were expecting down there, you know, for cold down there in March and April. And then I just felt comfortable not having any frills in my setup or any extra stuff. So I was able to cut a lot of stuff out because I realized on the long trail, I just didn't need it, right? Like some certain luxury items, whatever they may be.
Interesting. And then I'm always curious about this too. Are you a shelter person, or do you set up a tent on your own, or do you do a hammock? I don't know what your gear choice.
So I was in a tent. Yeah, I was in a tent for the first 1,200 miles in 2019. I sheltered a couple times, like a bit early on, but I stopped sheltering pretty quickly. And then in Pennsylvania at the like 1,200 mile mark, I had ordered a hammock. I switched into my hammock, and I did that all the way to Katahdin. And then on this hike, I went Massachusetts to Springer in a hammock.
Okay. But obviously in the winter you would need a tent or a shelter.
Right. In the winter months I was like in a tent, sleeping pad, sleeping bag, that whole setup. Yeah. And I was in shelters most nights this winter.
Yeah. Incredible.
Stomp, you look like you were going to ask a question.
No, I just don't want to jump ahead. I'm super curious about the winter prep and winter experiences. So yeah let's pace ourselves.
We can get into it. Yeah.
Oh, heck yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there
in a minute. But just the hammock versus the tent, can you just give your perspective on the differences? Because that's a great debate. And I've been tenting for a while, but I've been messing around with my hammock a little bit, and I definitely feel more comfortable in the hammock, and I can fall right asleep in that versus a tent. But can you talk a little bit about why you prefer the hammock?
I'm about to sound like such a hammock salesman. So it to me, it's so much better. It's not even close. Unless you're a stomach sleeper, like you should be in a hammock. You should be in a hammock. It's way more versatile. You know how many campsites I showed up into the Whites, and the caretaker looked at me and they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I went, "I have a hammock," and they went, "Great." You don't need to find a flat spot, and when you're in a tent, you almost never do find a flat spot anyway. So the hammock gets you up off the ground, up off the mud, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's way better in the rain. You can set up your tarp while it's raining before you set anything else up, and in the morning you can pack it all up underneath.
Yeah,
it might be a little
true.
heavier than a super ultralight tent setup, but to me, sleep is worth the wait. Like 10 out of 10 times, sleep is worth the wait. And especially on a through hike, you get strong enough to carry it. It's not like it's not like 2 pounds is going to make or break your through hike, right? And it's not like it's always 2 pounds heavier, but in my eyes, that weight is always worth it. And then I also like how you can be consistent about your night's sleep, right? So you can find 2 trees, and when you get good at setting your hammock up, it's at the same angle with the same tension every night. A tent, you really just don't get that unless you're camping on platforms every night, right? It's the ground's always tilted or whatever, and you'll be sliding out the side of your tent or something, and it's a lot easier to keep those things that you want to keep dry when you're in a hammock, your quilts and all that stuff. I just always found it easier.
Yeah, that's my big issue with the tent is exactly what you just talked about. Is it's fine if I'm on a platform, like I have no problem, I'll fall right asleep. But if I'm on like even, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if I'm on like a 1 or 2 degree angle that's not completely flat, like it gets in my head, and I'm like, I'm upside down right now. Now I'm going to flip around the other side. Oh, I don't feel right.
You feel it.
So
and you can sit in your hammock at camp. You actually have somewhere to like sit and do your stuff. Whereas in a tent, you just end up sitting always on the ground, which is when your legs are really stiff. Like I always found it to be a little more annoying.
Funny story.
You can elevate your sleep at night in a hammock. I'm sorry, I'm just like, go off on the hammocks. You can elevate your sleep. It's like so nice. But what were you going to say, Stomp?
My wife and I, when we finished our 48 together on Mount Carrigain, it was funny. There was a couple on top of they were sleeping on top of the fire tower in a hammock. So it was two of them, and the guy was like 6.5, 7 feet tall, and the woman was maybe like 4.5 feet tall. But I just can't imagine being comfortable with like two people in a hammock. Does that work?
They sell these double nested hammocks. So there's like two
really?
hammocks. They do, but you end up just getting smushed together anyway.
Oh, I can imagine.
They do sell hammocks that like would fit two people, right?
Yeah.
With your own like compartment. I don't know. I've never been
interesting. Yeah, that was interesting. Huh. Anyway.
Interesting. All right, so you avoid the shelters. What about the social aspect of that 2019 hike? Did you find like a group of people that were sort of your same speed and sort of your same personality that you meshed with pretty well?
100%. I actually ended up meeting most of my like good friends from that hike. I met on Springer Mountain or at the first lean-to or like at the first town. I met a bunch of them, and I always like to do my own thing and beat on my own drum. And so we would hike together for a week or two, and then I'd split off for a week or two, and then we'd catch back up to one another, and then we'd split off, and then we'd catch back up to one another. And it just sort of went like that. We weren't like steadfast together the whole time, but we saw each other in big chunks throughout the entire trail, which was awesome, which was really great.
That's neat.
Yeah.
It's neat how that happens.
And then when you got into the Whites, that was the first time you had actually stepped foot in the White Mountains. Was in 2019. So you made it to Moosilauke. Were the Whites in Maine and that whole area? Was it exactly what you expected? Did it live up to your expectations the first time you went in there?
Yeah, it just blew my mind. I remember standing at Lonesome Lake, just totally mind blown, looking at Franconia Ridge. I camped at Liberty Springs. I left camp at 3:30 in the morning, and I sunrised Franconia Ridge. I got the little haystack, like the stars were still out. And then I had a beautiful day. I got views through all the presidentials, which was amazing. And then the way I always say it is when you picture the Appalachian Trail and you close your eyes and somebody says, picture the AT, the wild, the rivers, the forest. It's beautiful. It's rugged. It's fun. When you show up to Maine, it looks just like how you would picture it in my head. That's what Maine looks like. It's just so beautiful. So I was like over the top happy with all of it. It was a blast.
Great. And then you finished 2019 and then ended up finding a job in New Hampshire, and I'm assuming that's where you spent. Well, how long did it take you to do the 111?
I started the 111 in the fall of 2016. After I did the long trail, I started ticking away at those peaks, and then I finished about a year ago. I did Reddington and Owl's Head on my last day and finished. Okay. Which is a weird combo, but
yeah. And were you doing a lot of those overnights, or were they just day hikes from your house?
It was a mix. I'd say more day hikes, but there were plenty of overnights thrown in there. A big thing to do in the Adirondacks especially is hike in, set up camp, and then go out and back to a mountain from there. So you're not carrying all your overnight stuff up, but then you end up camping out, right? So you're sort of like day hiking, but you're hiking in with your backpacking gear. Yeah.
Okay. So you did the long trail, you did the AT, you're now in New Hampshire, you're starting to do a mix of day hikes and overnights to do some peak bagging. I'm assuming this is where you started getting into the winter backpacking and sort of learning how to manage yourself in winter.
Right. So I believe it was in the late fall, early winter of 2017 where I first put snowshoes on. The fall was coming and I was like, oh, darn, I have to wait till next year to keep hiking. And then I realized that people bought snowshoes and hiked in the winter. So I was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. So it was all day hikes 2017 and 18. And then right before the 18 in 2019, I did my first winter overnight in the Adirondacks. So I went out on a trail I was really familiar with. I slept on my deck the night before to like make sure my sleep system would keep me warm enough and everything. And I just went out. It was like 0 degrees that night. I did the whole thing and made a lot of mistakes and learned from them all. And then in the years after that, I slowly started to buy more of the equipment and make it lighter. And get warmer sleeping bags and slowly start to, and a lot of this happened in the Whites, some of it in the Adirondacks as well. But this was when I started like going on the bigger overnight, multi-night backpacking trips in the winter. Yeah.
Were you mostly going solo, or did you have a crew that you would go with?
I think I only did like one winter overnight with a friend. I think every other winter overnight and most of the winter hikes I was doing was by myself.
And through the long trail and the AT, so it sounds like you had your crew of friends, but for the most part during the day you would just do your own thing. And I'm assuming there'd be plenty of nights where you were on your own as well. Can you talk a little bit about, like, do you consider yourself more of an introvert where you're okay being alone, or do you prefer to be around a crew of people?
No, I definitely feel like I'm on the introverted side. I like to be alone. It doesn't really bother me, and it's something I liked hiking because of that. I struggled a lot with like anxiety in my life, and hiking out by myself really helps me sort of sort through stuff and let some thoughts come and go in a lot more of a peaceful way. And so when I'm alone, I get that space. And so that's why I'm always just drawn to hiking alone, I think.
Got it.
Same. For sure.
Yeah, I'm probably more of an extrovert, but I get that same thing as like my morning runs by myself or the hikes by myself. It's sort of like a reset button.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. I was curious, so I want to get into the southbound hike here. But before we get into that, can you talk a little bit about, so you obviously worked for a couple of years, saved up some money. You were able to take like 5 or 6 months off to do this particular hike. Sounds like you're in sort of a STEM field. Can you talk a little bit about like sort of your advice? I have kids in college right now, and I sort of tell them, I'm like, pick a field that's going to be in high demand so that you won't have to worry about getting a job. Like you can get a job and then you can leave a job and then find a position anytime you want, or you can go to grad school or whatever it is. But I do feel like a lot of people sort of get trapped either. They don't never develop a skill that's in demand, or they get sort of stuck in this like trap of like having to work to just survive. Can you talk a little bit about like what advice do you have for people around their education if they do want to, I guess, have flexibility later on in life?
Right. And that's where I think engineering was good for me. Was I got an engineering degree, and I realized that mechanical engineering didn't really fit me. Working as a mechanical engineer wasn't necessarily something that fit me super well, but the degree is really versatile, right? So having a versatile degree really helps. And then I consider myself someone who lives pretty simply, right? So I figure out where I can save money, and I save it there. And that's where I was able to save up for this hike. Was I just didn't spend money on a whole lot of other things. My hobbies mostly consist of hiking and rock climbing. And once you buy the gear for that, the activity itself is usually free. You need to pay for gas to get to the place.
Yep.
And so then it comes down to, the timing will never be perfect, and you sort of just have to make your own perfect timing, right? Especially a lot of people my age, I was in a lucky situation where I could afford to do this, and not everybody's in that situation, but which is hard, but the time doesn't exist unless you make it. And it doesn't need to be a 5 or 6 month through hike, right? It could be something like the long trail, which is much, much shorter. But I think, I don't know, it's just something that means enough to me for me to divert all my resources towards and save up for and all of that. So I think it was also important for me to really think about it and think to myself, is this really a place where I want to spend all my time and money? Is that truly where I want to do it? And that, in this case, my answer is yes. And so it's been worth taking that jump, right? I hope that answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah. And there's no easy answer to that, because depending on everybody, everybody has a different situation. But I think I hear a lot of people that sort of have that similar perspective of you, is that if you don't make it happen, it's never going to happen, and you've got to make sacrifices along the way, and you've got to make some some difficult choices, and you got to make some smart decisions in order to get yourself to the point where you have that flexibility. I think young people, if anybody's listening, younger people, my advice is always that the older you get, the more likely it is that you're going to be stuck with responsibilities that won't allow you to be able to have the freedom to do things like through hiking. So do them when you can early, and you have a lot more time. I can imagine, Scott, you probably saw a bunch of like 65, 70-year-old people on these long hikes where they're like, oh, I wish I'd done this way earlier.
Yeah. The thing I always say is everybody tells me to do it while I'm young, so I'm listening.
Yes.
Listening to the advice,
exactly.
right?
It's true.
All right. Well, at some point you decided to do a southbound through hike. Did you make that decision specifically and say, like, I'm gonna do this no matter what, or were you? I guess, what was your thought? Like, how did you decide to do this southbound hike? Because you must have known that, like, a lot of it's the weather could completely ruin it for you.
Right. So it sort of started with this idea of I wanted another adventure, and it started with this idea of me wanting to spend a winter outside in whatever fashion that might look like. I was thinking, like, I was trying to look for places where I could drag a sled around for the winter and like load it up with stuff. I was just like, I want to spend the winter outside and just let it happen and see what happens. And then I was trying to figure out a way to do it in a way that it would be fun and challenging. And then the idea, I was like, oh, maybe I'll do the long trail this winter. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do the long trail, I may as well just do the AT. Like, it's longer, it's bigger. That would be awesome. So once, like, it sort of snowballed into the AT. And then once that idea came into my head, it really, really stuck. And I think I really did a good job with my expectations. Like, as you're saying, like, how the weather could totally throw this whole thing off. Once I got the idea in my head of how I wanted to do the AT in the winter, I went and did Katahdin last summer because I know very well, like, I mean, I didn't make it to the top of Katahdin because it's not really up to you whether you make it to the tops of these mountains in the winter, right? You have to be able to make the good call. And so I summited Katahdin last winter, knowing that I might show up and it might just be not doable. And then I sort of had this idea in my head that if things weren't going to work out, the weather was going to be too tough, I still wanted to spend the winter outside, and I still wanted it to be an adventure. And so I was going to, if I needed to make my footsteps continuous but divert around the Presidentials, the Mahoosics, whatever, which some of the river crossings in the 100, if I needed to do any of that, I went into it with this attitude of, like, that's what it's going to take to do this. Just go have an adventure. Don't attach yourself to the idea of, like, you must walk every step on the AT, even if it kills you. Because I knew how silly that would be. And I knew if my expectations were there, I might end up disappointed and with this sort of unrealistic expectation of myself, because in the end of the day, we don't get to choose the weather and how dangerous it can really be out there.
Yeah, it's crazy. So as far as, like, the date when you locked it in and said, I'm doing it, how far ahead of when you left was it that you decided that you're gonna be out there for at least the winter?
Right. So I decided last summer that I, like, for sure wanted to do this and start in December at some time, because I knew Katahdin opened in December. And then I found out that you can't really apply for any of those winter sites or any of the permits until November. So I found it a good weekend where I could get a ride up there. My mom and sister drove me up there. And once I found out what weekend would work there, I just applied for the permits. I mailed everything in. They got back to me and said, December works. I think I booked 2 nights at Katahdin Streams to give myself a multi-day window to do Katahdin. The day that ended up being the best was the day that I was going to hike in. So I knew I'd be cutting it close anyway, because you have to take the Blueberry Ledges Trail in like 4.5 miles. I had to drop all my stuff that I didn't need and then start up Katahdin. So, and the daylight's so limited. It's December up in Baxter, right? The sun goes down at 4. And nobody staffed on that side of the park that early in the year. So you're really, in Baxter, you're alone. And then this situation, I knew I was really, really alone. And the Hunt Trail is the Hunt Trail. So I had that all locked in, and I told myself any of these days will work. But as I got closer, I knew I needed to be flexible and just pick the best weather day and give it a shot as good as best I could.
Wow. And then, so you do your thing around Katahdin, and then you enter the 100-mile wilderness. Yeah. I'm assuming by that point that there's not a lot of people around. What was the snowpack like at that point?
So it was 3 or 4 inches of snow on the ground in Baxter. Going up Katahdin, I didn't quite need snowshoes, but it was like 8-9 inches of snow, and the drifts up on the ridge were way higher, but I wasn't going to be up on the ridge with all that technical stuff in my snowshoes. Going into the 100-mile, it was not a lot of snow, couple inches. And then I had to do 2 big days in a row early on in the 100 because there was a storm coming that was all like 40-degree rain. So I knew it was going to wipe out a lot of the snow, but I also knew if I get wet 3 days into the 100-mile, that's like a disaster waiting to happen because the temperatures were going to dip again.
Yeah.
So I pulled 2 big days, and then I woke up at like 2 in the morning one day and did like 9 miles before 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning. And then the end of that 9-mile section, I forded my first river in the 100, and I got right to a campsite and sat in the shelter for the entire day because I couldn't afford to lose miles that day by not hiking, but I didn't want to get drenched in the rain only to have it all freeze the next day, knowing that I still had 5 days left in the 100. So that rainstorm wiped out a lot of the snow at lower elevations and made the trail a lot. It was either dry trail or it was a lot of just ice. It was all ice. And then once I got back into the mountains there, it became a little more snow, but I never actually needed my snowshoes in the 100-mile. I was able to just do it in boots and spikes.
How do you get your information?
Yeah, so I had looked up the weather before I left and screenshotted everything, but I knew that forecast was only going to be good for a couple of days. And then I have a GPS satellite pinger, and I think 1 or 2 times in there I pinged my family and had them send me a quick little rundown of the weather. Just like highs, lows, precip, that sort of thing, just so I could get an idea of what was gonna be happening. Because you have to, I had to go into I went into the 100-mile with, I don't know exactly how much it weighed, but it was about 70 pounds. I want to reload my pack and weigh it all and see how much exactly it all weighed, but it was about 70 pounds because I had to have 2 fuel bottles because I needed to do Baxter and the 100-mile with 1 fuel resupply in my white gas stove. And I had to carry all my gear into the 100 because you can't count on 8-day weather forecast, right? I had to assume I might get nailed with a blizzard at some point in there or the temperatures will plummet. So I had to go in with my full setup because I was fording those rivers and everything. So I couldn't leave anything behind going, oh, the weather will be good enough, right? You can't count on that. So my pack was really heavy going in, and I ended up carrying my snowshoes the whole way through. I didn't need them.
Is it the Kenebec River that you have to cross? What's the big river that you have to get across, and how did you do that?
So that's the Kenebec. So you get through the 100-mile and you get to Monson, and then like 40 trail miles later, maybe something like that, is Caratunk. Caratunk sits on the north side, the Appalachian Trail north side of the Kenebec River. In summer months, you get canoed across. They have hours, you get canoed across. I reached out to the ATC. They got me in touch with the guy who runs the shuttle. I gave him a call. He said, yeah, river's still open. I'll get you across. No problem. You're going to be there this day. Sure, I'll show up at 8 in the morning. We'll canoe you across. Well, that morning, it was like 0 degrees or something. And there's a sandbar down the river from where you cross, and that had iced up, and it ice jammed the whole river. So that morning I show up, and he's like, this is the first day of the year that it's jammed up. Sorry, I can't get you across. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So I got driven around to, is that Main 27 or Main 5, where Kingfield is in Stratton in the Carabassa Valley. And I got dropped off at the edge of this snowed-in dirt road. I hiked 6.5 miles in on this dirt road to hit the AT. I was in my snowshoes for that. I hit the AT. I hiked 17.5 miles northbound to hit the south end of the river. And then I turned around and backtracked. So I had to backtrack like 24.5 miles of hiking to get those miles on the south end of the river.
Yeah, that's dedication.
So it was like 2 days out of my, 2 like full days of hiking out of my way. But when I started backtracking on the AT, I dropped some food. I like put some food up in a tree And like I had checked the weather, so I didn't need my snowshoes, my ice axe, or any of that. I knew the terrain, so I left all that at a lean-to, and then just did the out and back with a little bit of a lighter load, and then just grabbed my stuff and kept going. But funny enough, I get to the south edge of the river. They must have opened the dam, and the ice jam had cleared. It was perfectly good to go across in a canoe. But
so you could have just waited a day.
Yeah, but I had no idea, but I could have. So I stood on the south side of the river. I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
Oh boy! And then at this point, so you're carrying. I saw your gear list, and I'll link the video in the show notes because you do have. Scott does have a YouTube channel where he's got some good videos on there, especially that gear video. But you're carrying an 85-liter Osprey backpack, and then you've got a 4-season tent you're using, right?
I did. I used that until the whites.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So you're carrying heavy gear at that point. Very heavy. So you get through the 100-mile wilderness, you make it through the river situation, and then you're into the Bigelows and Old Spec, and then into Mahoosic. At what point were you feeling a little bit confident, like, with this weather situation and the ground coverage with snow, like I may actually be able to get into the whites without having to do any crazy sort of redirects off the trail?
Right. So that's where I was just sort of sitting there waiting. I was like, when is a huge blizzard just going to like make this thing turbo hard? Because it was already insanely hard, right? And I was just like, when is this blizzard going to slow me down to 6 miles a day, 7 miles a day? And, that just didn't happen in December. I mean, there's snow up in the Bigelows and the Crockers, and, I'm in my snowshoes and I'm trudging through snow, but it's not waist deep snow drifts at that point, right? Which it very well could be. It was like maybe 2 feet of snow at the tops of the mountains in like the thickest parts, maybe a little more on like the saddlebacks in some spots. But otherwise, I'm on a foot of snow most of the time, like climbing up the Crockers and stuff like that.
And how long had you been on trail by the time you got to the Mahoosics?
I got to the Mahoosics right in early January.
Yeah.
I remember.
So almost a month?
Yeah, just about a month. It took me about a month, a little over a month to get through Maine. So I realized...
Just for the listeners, I mean, that's a long time to hike. Just to show what Scott is or was committed to here. It's pretty awesome.
It was a headspace. It was very much like this headspace I've never been in my life. Because I'll go back and watch those videos I took, and I'm like, that just looks like too much. That's insane. But I was ready for it every day.
Wow.
And you maybe ran into a couple of day hikers. That's about it.
I ran into a group of 3-day hikers on the Crockers at the 200-mile mark. I ran into like 2 or 3 more day hikers on Old Spec. Those are the only day hikers I saw in Maine. I saw, between Katahdin and Route 2 in New Hampshire, I saw 7 moose, and I think I saw like 5 to 7 day hikers. I saw just about as many moose as day hikers.
Yeah. Did you, what was the adjustment to the cold like for you, both physically and mentally? And it's kind of fun. I've been like following there's a couple of people like influencers on YouTube, and there's this whole idea around, cold therapy. And the whole idea goes back to like when we were primitive people, there was populations of people that survived in the cold for extended periods of time. And there's this idea that like exposing yourself to cold conditions brings back whatever primitive sort of instincts that we have as humans. And I don't know how much of that is sort of just nice marketing material for some of these special diets or fitness routines or whatnot. But can you talk a little bit about the effects of cold, for being in cold conditions for an extended period of time like that? Because it's very rare that somebody is dealing with that unless you're on like an expedition like you were on.
Right. So it was hard for me to tell whether I actually had any physical adaptations, but I can say that mentally you do adjust to it. My mental adjustment took some time, but I got to the point where I expected to be cold every day. I expected not to be able to take more than a 10-minute break. I expected putting on my gear in the morning to be cold and miserable. Like, those things just became the norm. My face was always cold from the wind and ice and stuff, and I I was always dealing with that. So to me, it was more of a headspace because I have no idea if I actually had any physical adaptations, but you also get a lot better at managing it. I think you get lots of little things, like my routine in the evening was so dialed, the order with which I did everything. I was so good at making sure that I only did take my gloves off if I ever did for a very minimized amount of time. I found out the way to sit in my sleeping bag with it all around me in the best way so that my back and legs wouldn't get cold while I was sitting. Like so many little things like that, like the order in which I did things, the order in which I delayered in the evening was even dialed so that I was making sure I was cooking all my food at the same time as I was changing out of my layers at the right time, where I wasn't putting any of my sweat from the day into my dry clothes at the end of the day, right? So for an example, this might be hard to understand. For an example, I'd get to camp, I'd drop my stuff, I'd grab my water bottles, grab my ice axe, and go to the water source without changing anything first. Because I'm still sweating from the day, I don't want to let that moisture wick off me and cool down a little bit before I change into my dry layers, because I don't want to carry any of my moisture into those layers for camp to keep them dry, because you can't dry anything out ever in these situations. Nothing will ever dry out. Even if you sleep with it, it just ends up being still damp. So it was something like that where I made sure at the end of the day I didn't change for 20 minutes, so that when I did change, I was fully dry and void of moisture getting into my other clothes, so that day after day when I put those on, I actually stayed warm at camp, right?
Interesting. So I've found it virtually. So I've done a little bit of winter backpacking. One of the things that is most difficult for me is I found it virtually impossible to keep my socks in my boots from getting wet. So, I mean, my system is that I just bring an extra pair of socks for the next day. I'll take them off and I'll put the boots in my sleeping bag. Can you talk a little bit about how did you manage that? Did you just live with wet feet, or you can't sustain that?
No. So this was the one thing that here was my problem with this. I'll say this before I start explaining what I did. If I couldn't practice for any of this stuff in the fall or the summer because it's not cold enough, you can't prepare for any of this stuff. So last winter, I didn't really know I was going to do this. I would have spent way more time tinkering with this whole system, my footwear system, had I known this. But this is what I did. This is what worked for me. I was carrying 8 pairs and some of this advice came from the hiking Viking. He did something slightly different than I did. I carried 8 pairs of socks with me, 2 dedicated pairs of socks to wear at camp. And then I would wear 3 pairs of socks while I was hiking. Liner and 2 very thick wool socks. And then I would wear a vapor barrier over all of that. A vapor barrier, just like a little sort of semi-waterproof layer over all my socks to keep some of the moisture from getting to the boot. And then I would usually wear toe warmers in my sock layers, because every morning I was putting on something moist and it was really hard to keep everything dry. So I would sleep in my dry socks, sleep with all my damp layers next to me. In the morning I'd wake up, put those damp layers on, put the toe warmers on, put the vapor barrier on, put them in my boots, which I've been sleeping with, tie everything up, and then once I've gotten my boots on, I've got about 20 minutes before I've got to start walking. Otherwise, my feet get way too cold. I need to get my blood flowing into my feet. The extra set of dry hiking socks usually came out on my last day or two of the stretch, or on a particularly cold day. I would put those socks on. I made sure I always had a dry set for a particularly cold day and a dry set for camp. When I went to sleep every night, right before I went to sleep, I would take my boots, scrape any extra ice and snow off of them, put them in plastic bags, and they went inside of my sleeping bag with me. So the moisture from the boot, when I heated them up with my body heat, wouldn't get to my sleeping bag, and it sort of soggied my boot up. But it was just the best I could do. In the morning, that's why I just had to throw them on, get moving quickly to keep my boots sort of warm enough. Because the other thing that was really frustrating was if your hands are cold, you take off your glove, you shove your hands in your armpits, or you throw a hand warmer in. But if your feet are cold, they're under gaiters, rain pants, boots, snowshoes, 3 pairs of socks. They're really hard to get to. So you want to make sure they're warm enough. So that's where once I got to New Hampshire, I sort of just said, this is silly. Let me just pack toe warmers out for every single day of the stretch, because this is not worth losing a toe over half a pound of toe warmers, right?
Yeah.
What kind of boots are you running with there during this stretch? I'm just curious.
So I was wearing Salomon Tundra Pros, I believe they're called, for through Maine. But then my feet got a little bigger, which they do when you through hike, and I wanted to be able to put more socks on. And had trouble ordering the right size of those, and I couldn't find them in the store. So I went to the REI in North Conway, and I bought size 13 wide Zambolin Vios, which are just an uninsulated leather winter boot. But the 13 wide let me put all those socks in there.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, which helped me stay
That's great.
warm.
Interesting, because we talked about winter hiking a little bit, and this is for day hiking, so I don't have to worry about moisture. But my advice to people in the winter day hikes has been to go with like a liner sock or a mid-weight sock, and make sure that you're not cutting off circulation by double layering up. So I would assume that you would probably have to manage making sure that whatever socks you're putting on can't be too tight, because there's a diminishing return when you have too much tightness around your feet because the circulation cuts off.
This was something I learned this is one of those cold weather things that I learned along the way big time. The one good thing about the Zamberlin boot was it was sort of hard on the top. It was quite strong structure. So anything I strapped onto it, snowshoes, crampons, microspikes, didn't press down too much on my foot. That, combined with me not tying anything too tightly at all, gave especially the top of my foot plenty of room to let blood flow go around my foot. And then all my socks were of the right size so that nothing was constricting my foot in any way. So I had no constriction points, and that is something that to me made one of the biggest differences of all. Is once I started moving and I had no constriction anywhere on my foot, if I tied everything properly and put my snowshoes on just tight enough where they'd stay on but they didn't press anywhere on my foot too hard, my feet stayed warm. I sort of figured that out.
Interesting. So you're dialing all this stuff in the first month or so. Were you able to just keep yourself occupied? I know you said that you're fine doing solo hiking and whatnot, but there's got to be a feeling of isolation that gets to you. Did you struggle mentally at all, or were you occupied enough with figuring out how to dial in your gear and planning out your day-to-day routes that it didn't cause you any mental stress?
No, it definitely was. It was really, really mentally challenging to be out there alone. Just because I wouldn't even see day hikers or anyone. There was just nobody out there. And so, yeah, a lot of the day you're focused doing things, and it's really mentally exhausting, like you're saying, to be paying attention to all those little things and picking up on. But being out there day after day like that, when you're having a hard moment, there's nobody there to cheer you up, and you can't count on that. You have to count on yourself in that moment to pick yourself up. And that's extremely mentally exhausting. And it's a reason I took a lot of days off up there. I ended up getting through New England. I think I took 12 0 days, which is no mileage days, where I ended up just resting inside somewhere. And that was probably more physical than mental, and sometimes weather related. But I needed days where I sat in a room and wasn't thinking about anything all day, like thinking about staying warm or any of that. And also where I could chat with some of my friends and call my family and do that. It really gave me a big boost to do those things, because you just don't have access to that on the trail. And it was exhausting mentally.
Yeah, I bet. Curious, we'll exit Maine and talk about New Hampshire in a minute, but I am curious, when you got into the Mahoosic, so you're coming down the arm, which must have been an adventure, but then going through the notch, can you talk a little bit about going down the arm, going through the notch, and then sort of making it out to Rattle River? I have to assume that at that point you're sort of like, oh wow, this is like a real possibility, like I can make this happen.
Yeah, so I sort of, in my head, sorry, I feel like I'm going real roundabout with these questions you're asking me, but
that's fine.
In my head before I started, it was like, there were a few big things on this trail that I lost sleep over. It was Katahdin, the 100-mile, the Mahoosics, the Presidentials, right? Like, these were sections that really were really fear-inducing. You can probably see it on my face, right? Like, these were scary sections to think about. And so going into the Mahoosics, I had gotten off at South Arm Road into Andover. I took a 0. So I had 50 miles from South Arm Road through to Route 2. And I was planning on it 5 days. So I was trying to average 10 a day. So actually, when I went down the arm and through the notch, it was a tiring, long, exhausting, hard day. But I had done enough miles a day before to afford myself 5 miles that day, or 6 miles. Whatever it is, from Spec Pond Lean-To to Full Goose, which is pretty much over the arm, down the arm, through the notch, and then you climb right to the lean-to. So I left early in the morning. I went down the arm slowly, but I made my way down. And then getting through the notch, I took a break before, and I knew it was just going to turn into this wrestling match with the snow. And that's when I really realized how heavy my pack was I was taking it off and trying to like move it without it being on my back, like drag it and pull it and lift it through these little holes. And it was so exhausting. I mean, I was working for 10 or 15 minutes sometimes just to go 6 feet. Like, it would take me like 10 minutes just to go like 6 to 10 feet, just because getting up on these ledges when there's nothing to grab onto is really, really tough. I got really, really lucky that someone had clearly done a northbound Mahoosic traverse in the week before I went in there, and there wasn't really a lot of fresh snow. I could see very faint footsteps through Mahoosic Notch. So I knew that someone had stepped somewhere and that it was a safe place to step. Because otherwise, I had budgeted like 4 or 5 hours to get through there, because I thought there was going to be a lot of me taking my pack off so I was more agile and like stepping in certain areas and poking a lot and testing everything out. And then once I figured out what was safe, I'd come back and grab my bag and do it. I didn't have to do any of that because I knew that someone else had walked. Oh, they walked on this big rocky mound. It must be safe to walk on because I see footsteps there. So I got extremely lucky, and it still took me 3 hours to go through the notch.
But
I got lucky. I was literally verbally thanking this mystery person for doing this. So if you did a Mahoosic traverse in late December, thank you.
Well, it's funny you say that too, because you're so right about when you're in conditions where it's like early snow, but there's enough snow on the ground. Sometimes, like especially when you're in like a scree field or rock scrambling and things like that, sometimes I'd rather be in a situation where you've got a lot of snow, so you're not poking around to fall into those crevices to figure out like what's safe to step in and what's not safe to step in. Like sometimes that can take a lot longer than it would if you just got hit with like 2 feet of snow.
So yeah, I don't know what the optimal amount of snow to go through Mahoosic Notch is, but I made it through. You know, would it have been easier if there was a 2-foot storm beforehand? Maybe, maybe not. But yeah, there were some spots where, you know, it was also that a lot of times where that gave me trouble, whereas there was like 1.5 feet of snow on the ground in most spots. And so I'd be in my snowshoes because it was the easier to walk, but then it still wasn't deep enough. So I'd like trip on roots that were underneath the ground, or I'd slip on a big ice sheet that was underneath the snow because I was sometimes getting through to there. The snow was thinner. So all the conditions just have their own difficulties. You just have to manage all of it.
Yeah, and Stomp, I don't know if you've been to the Mahoosics, but like, and Scott, you can probably talk about this, but I would assume, so you get through the notch and then you sort of take that left to head up to the shelter, and you still got to climb with 70 pounds on your back with that metal rungs. You got to climb up that ladder. That must have been brutal, but at least you get to the shelter pretty quickly.
That's the thing. You know, it was like 1.5 miles from there to the shelter. It's something really close, but I mean, these uphills were at best 1 mile an hour, less. Like these were, I ended up in tears on small uphills because of just, it was so exhausting. And mentally, like, you know, it's the end of the day. This didn't happen in the Mahoosics because it was a shorter day, but in so many spots, like this happened later in the Mahoosics, I had to pull a 15-mile day to make up some of that mileage. It's dark, it's late, I'm going uphill. I'm like 2 miles from camp, but I'm fully aware it's going to take me 2 hours. And mentally wrapping my head around that when it's already 4:30 and dark and I have 2 more hours of night hiking, it just would take a lot of mental power to calm myself down and not lose it, because it would have just been all too easy to lose it in a situation like that, which was something I had to deal with on an almost daily basis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, then eventually you get to Rattle River, and then was the hostel open at that point? Were they
No,
able to stay there?
No, but my dad actually had planned to come up and visit me that weekend. He wanted to come up to the Whites and visit me, and so that he picked me up from Route 2.
Okay, so you get the Gorham or
I got to, we stayed in like North Conway or something, and we hung out, went to the store, like resupplied, zeroed, did all of that. And it felt really good to be through the Mahoosics. I think one of the scariest parts of this entire trail was coming down Goose Eye. It was terrifying. There's a little rock scramble. Goose Eye's beautiful.
Right off the summit.
I got blown onto my hands and knees. You came
down the Goose Eye Trail?
With the ladder and then the rebar, yeah.
Okay, on the Carlo side.
And then
gotcha.
Carlo.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
Gosh. That was a really intense section. I mean, I was on Goose Eye, getting blown onto my hands and knees by the wind. It was freezing. And then I descend Goose Eye. I had to throw my pack off that ledge, take my ice axe out with my crampons and down climb it. And then Carlo Cole was coming up. It's like you do like 100 feet of uphill, and you're like rock climbing. It was so intense. So, I mean, after the Mahoosic, my abs are sore, my shoulders, my arms, I'm sore everywhere from that. It was really full body exercise.
So when you got into North Conway, was that where you did your sort of first dumping of gear or changing gear around?
So that's where I dumped the 4-season tent, which was 5 pounds, and I got a 3-season tent that was a 1-person tent that weighed like 2 pounds. So I saved myself a ton of weight, because I was like, I'm not sleeping in this thing, and I'm not sleeping like above tree line in a storm. Like, I don't need this ridiculous heavy tent. I just found that.
Did you ever have to set up above tree line at all?
No. I was always able to get to a covered spot out of the wind for the most part.
So you took that 4-season tent with the idea that just in case I get stuck and I need to set up above tree line, I have it?
Well,
was that your thought?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily above tree line, but it was like, in a blizzard or some crazy wind or a snowstorm, or on the off chance I do need to set up in a spot that's near above tree line in a windy position, like this tent will be great, right? I just found that not to be the reality of what was happening. And I was like, okay, well, this shelter will do for what I've been going through. And cutting the weight I felt was huge. So I cut that weight. I cut a couple extra things I was carrying. Small things, like I switched from, I was carrying 2 hydro flasks and a Nalgene. I got rid of one of the hydro flasks and carried 2 Nalgenes and a hydro flask. It saved me some weight and also allowed me to put 2 hot water bottles in my sleeping bag at night to stay warm instead of 1.
Oh, see, that's what I was going to ask you. Before we ditched the tent, I just was wondering how your nights were settling in with the tent and how you were staying warm, what you were sleeping on. Maybe just talk briefly about that, how you dealt with condensation, things like that.
Right. So when I was in the shelters, I would just sleep in the shelter. I wouldn't set anything up. That helped with condensation, because my sleep system was warm enough where I didn't have to set like a tent up or anything around it. And then when I set up in my tent, I was in my tent, I'd open all the vents on everything, and I had a thermarest. So I'd put on my thermarest, just like the flat like foam pad, and then I had a Cedar Summit X Therm over that, like the large version, so it's an R rating of like 7, that sleeping pad. And then I had a Western Mountaineering Lynx, which is a -10-degree bag, and then I'd sleep with all my electronics, my boots, clothes, everything inside. And then I would sleep in on cold nights. On the coldest nights, I would sleep in 2 to 3 pairs of wool socks and my down booties, 2 pairs of leggings, down pants, and then like 3 base layers up here. And then I had like a buff and a hat that were specifically dry for camp. So I slept in all of that in my -10-degree bag with 2 boiled Nalgenes worth of water in there.
That's pretty epic. I've had like 1 or 2 nights in situations like that, and that's a tough night's sleep, man.
It's just
Did you ever get a solid night's sleep?
I slept like a rock. I slept very well. I would sleep for 10 to 11 hours a night. I would pass out at 6 or 7 and wake up at like 5 in the morning.
Wow.
Did you ever struggle, like going back to your early days of through hiking when you first started? Did you struggle learning to sleep on trail? Because I found like I used to struggle, and then I don't know what happened, but like it was like a switch. All of a sudden, I just realized like mentally I don't have to worry about it. Like I can just fall asleep. I don't know what happened, but I learned to just sleep outside when I first started the first few times I couldn't do it.
It definitely took me a sec. Like those early days, I remember like anything rustles in the leaves, like it's a bear for sure, right? Whereas, slowly with time, I got used to the sounds of the woods at night, and I got used to sleeping on some unlevel ground or in a damp sleeping bag or whatever have you it may be. It just came with time. And so by the time I hit this trail, I felt like I was more mentally prepared to just jump right into that. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, then you get back on trail in Rattle River. So you must have assumed like, okay, now I'm going to be in the whites. I'm going to see way more people. So you at least don't have to worry about the isolation as much. How was it going through the whites in I guess it was what? So if I look at the dates here, you were like January 9th is when you started
up
going through.
Yep. So I didn't see anyone that first day. I saw a handful of people the next day doing the whole like Carter Wildcat Traverse, which I had a really mentally tough morning that morning because when I woke up it was cold and I had gotten some freezing rain the night before, and then it was going to be like 20 below on the Carters that day, and just my head was already in Pinkham Notch. My head was like, how are you going to get there? It's so far. It's so rugged. And I realized I was like, you can't think about that. You're thinking too much. Like, just unzip your sleep bag. You know what you need to do. Just start moving. You'll get there. It was a beautiful day. Coming down off the Wildcats was full on. Coming down off the Wildcats was intense. Ending the day exhausted. What is it, like 15, 14 miles from the Imp all the way to the Pinkham Notch? Like, I'm at the end of the day, the sun's going down, and I'm going down some of the steepest stuff on the AT, and it's just all ice and snow. And I'm just like so mentally focused. So I zeroed the day after that because of the weather. It just wasn't good Prezi weather, like 70 below in Washington or something. And it's nice to talk about other people who've been to the whites because when I say that to people, they're like, what do you mean it was so? I'm like, that's what happens on Washington. It's 70 below.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I zeroed the next day, and I got really, really lucky. The timing worked out. I had a friend who could come up and do half the presidentials with me. He was going to meet me halfway through the day and do the prezzies with me. And I had another friend who heard I was going to be in the prezzy, and he's like, I have got to come up and see you on the ridge. Like, this is too cool to miss. So I hiked over Madison and slept at the Valleyway. Madison was pretty wicked. Madison was cold and really windy and a total whiteout. It was intense.
Up Osgood to Madison?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Breaking all of Osgood to Madison.
Oh.
It's tough.
Holy moly.
Yeah. Breaking Osgood at Madison and then getting thrashed around by the winds up there, because the heavy pack, when I have that pack on and the winds blow, like I am like a rag doll. Like when you hear a big gust coming, you just have to turn, plant your trekking poles, duck your head, and just take it, because trying to hike through some gusts, I would get knocked over. So I learned how to manage that, and then I slept at the Valleyway that night. The next morning I woke up and I had like a day and a half. I knew I had enough time to get over Madison, and then the next day I had to shoot all the way to Crawford Notch, because the next day it was going to be another one of those 80 below days or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do this like 18 and a half or almost 19 mile day. So I wake up in the morning and I start up, going from Madison Hut, going around Adams, and then I had a buddy meet me at Thunderstorm. My buddy stayed at the RMC hut and met me at Thunderstorm Junction, and he brought me some water and food, said hi, went his way, and then I started the traverse around Jefferson, which was one of the most intense things on this entire trail, was getting around Mount Jefferson. I mean, I don't know if you've been around there in the winter on the Gulf Side Trail. Yeah. It is, the cairns get spaced out. The snowfields are big. Like,
yeah,
you'll spin 360 degrees. You see white. You see nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the snowfield over there is probably the worst, and it's the most disconcerting of all of them, I think, in the whites that I've been in. I mean, I've been Star Lake, I've been in, but I think Jefferson is the one that really just is. I like to go above. I like to go high on it because it's just nerve wracking, and coming in that way it's a cool experience. And I've done the same thing your buddy did. Is I've stayed at the Hots at the RMC and then gone over to Jefferson and come back across. But most of the time I've gone through the snowfield, it's already people have gone across it, so you know, like, okay, here's where I'm going. But I'm guessing maybe you didn't have that luxury. You might have been one of the early people to go across.
I was pretty early. There were faint footsteps, like the first 2 or 3 steps into the snowfield. And then I could sort of see on the other side, like where I was aiming for. So I just straight shot it right across. That wasn't so bad. There was one moment where I ended up in this, it wasn't one of the snowfields, but it was just this big white void. And I ended up, like, I saw a cairn, and so I started taking it. But I realized really, once I got like 1 or 2 cairns, I realized, like, I'm heading into the Great Gulf. Like, this is not the AT.
Yes.
So I turned right around. I had my GPS out, and I realized, like, I was just like a couple hundred feet below the trail. So I popped right back up. Didn't find any signs or cairns, but I had my GPS out, and it was like, I'm on the trail. And so the good thing about that section is when it does get spaced out, the cairns, and it does get really hard to navigate, the trail goes really straight. Like, the trail is a completely straight shot. So I just walked straight, and I just kept going straight. The thing that was tough was, as you know, it's really bouldery and rocky below there. And so when you every 3rd or 4th step, I'm falling up to my thigh in snow, and then you have to wrestle out of it and keep walking. And, you're switching between terrain so much. I didn't have my snowshoes on because you're just like flipping back and forth between this terrain. So you're falling into the snow and wrestling through, and it was pretty slow going around there until I got back onto like the windswept rock, and then I could keep moving a little faster. So that was a really intense, like, couple miles there.
Any issues with your electronics with the cold?
No. I got an iPhone right before I left, and I swear they did something with this battery because I never had it die on me in the cold. I have no idea.
Same with your GPS? Oh, you were using not a dedicated GPS, but an iPhone?
I had a Garmin InReach.
Okay.
And that linked to my iPhone.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So I would keep it warm, and then I would just, like, if I needed to, take it out, put it right back if I needed to, right?
Okay.
And so I found my way clean through that part, except for that one break off where I went like 0.1 off, and then I came right back up. And then, what was I going to say? Yeah, looking back now, I was like, oh, I got the InReach Mini. I was like, oh, I wish I just got a full big InReach, just to all have it in one thing. But I also, that day in Washington, it was like 20 degrees, the high. I mean, the wind chills were lower, but I wasn't worried about any of my electronics dying in that temperature, because they hadn't failed me in way colder temps up to that point. So I felt pretty good about it. And then, the thing was that visibility up there that day, you're seeing 1 or 2 cairns ahead at a time, and it's windy. And so, it's still mentally exhausting. I'm like looking through this little slot in my gear, all my stuff just like cairn spotting all day. And then my friend met me at the top of the Jewel Trail, and we did the whole rest of the day together. We finished at like 8:30 at Crawford Notch, something like that. It was a long day.
Yeah.
Did you make them take you to the hot tub at the Omni Hotel right afterwards?
I wish. No, we just went right into North Conway and crashed somewhere, and then I zeroed the next day as well.
And then you go right into so you zero. You're getting some rest, and then you have to go into the next fun part, which is the Pemmy wilderness and that whole area.
Garfield Ridge.
Yeah, the Pemmy was a tough stretch because I've been on all that stuff in the winter, and so I knew it was going to be unbroken trail, whipping winds, and there was a big blizzard coming on Martin Luther King weekend. So that's when I went through this stretch. So I got to Ethan Pond. I think it was like 8 below when I left the trailhead that day to hike in. And I wake up, it's like, I asked the person in the hut the next morning, it was like 15 below that night or something. So it was cold. And then, but all that trail, I think the Ethan Pond trail was like sort of broken, but not fully broken out. But then going from the hut like up was fully broken. And I cut off trail and went to Guyot for the night. So I go over to Guyot, and I wake up the next morning in this raging blizzard. That was the day Washington gusted at 140, and it dropped like 15 inches of snow in Washington or something. So I have enough food. I packed a ton of food for this section because I was fully prepared for, like, if you can't get back over Guyot or South Twin or something, like, just plop it in your tent and ride it out.
Yep.
Because I kept myself enough food for that. And I knew also, like, I've had to do it before in the winter, bail off the backside of any of those to, is that also Route 2 back there? Whatever it is, whatever that road is back there, like where you access like Garfield and Galehead Hut and North.
Yeah, that's Route 3.
It's Route 3. So I was like, or if I need to bail back down to the hut, I was like ready to do all those things, right? But I threw my goggles on and I went across Guyot in this blizzard, and then I started breaking trail to South Twin. South Twin was the windiest spot probably for me on this whole trail. I started getting to the summit and the trees started shrinking, and I realized I was like, I don't know if I can walk over this right now. So I just started crawling to stay down so the wind wasn't. So I just started crawling through the snow, like to get up to the summit. And then I knew the summit, it's like you can get over the summit by staying in between those rocks and bracing with your arms. So that's what I did. So I put my trekking poles around my wrist so I didn't have to hold them, and then I just like one step at a time with like my hands on the rocks was like bracing myself and like walking over the summit because I knew it was short, but I got over it. It was really windy. It was really intense. It was wild. And then the descent was fine because of a lot of the fresh snow and the snow drifts. It just took me a long time to get to the Garfield hut because it was such thick snow.
Yeah. Wow.
And the trees are shaking, and it was a messy, windy. And then the next day, so I had to, that was one of the few nights I had to melt snow on the trail was at Garfield. I didn't even bother getting through the ice and snow to the spring that night, or even trying. So I get to the lean-to, I melt snow, I rest up, and the next day I was like, oh, it's gonna be really cold on Franconia Ridge. Like this might not go well, because after those blizzards all come through, it sucks all the air down, and it's still windy, but it's really cold. So yeah, I start up in the morning. I start really early because I know that I'm going to be making like 3/4 mile an hour over on the Garfield Ridge, right? It was so slow. It was such thick snow. Like in my snowshoes, I was like coming up to my thighs sometimes in snow.
Yeah, I can't imagine going up Garfield Ridge. I just can't imagine going up with a 60-pound or even a 50-pound. Like I don't know how much you were carrying, but like. I mean, me and Stomp we were cracking going up that in the summer in our day packs.
It was like 55, 60-pound bag at that point because I'd eaten all that food and I had the fuel, and so it was slow. It was just slow. It was so slow and in the dark. And when you hit those thick snow drifts and your snowshoes under 2.5 feet of snow, and you're just like wrestling. And then you start climbing, and climbing in the snow, if you're not careful, one step forward is you're sliding back. So I'm like kicking snow out of the way and like all this just to get 1 or 2 steps in. Finally, the sun's up, and I'm pushing up to Franconia Ridge, and I hit the Skookumchuck Trail junction right above tree line.
Just after that steep ledge, too, that you have to ascend. Oh!
Yeah. Really
Holy
steep.
Moly.
And I always take a break before tree line and gear up. So I took off my damp hat, damp buff, and put on my dry hat and dry buff. And to me, in my head also, logistics wise, the goal is to get into town today. So at this point, dry clothes, go on. Whatever's dry goes on. So I'm throwing all my layers on. I'm throwing 2 hand warmers in each mitten. I got foot warmers on. I got 2 pairs of leggings on underneath my rain pants. I've got every layer on. I've got my buff, my hat, like every layer is on my head. and I checked, and the wind chill was supposed to be like 35 or 38 below. It was going to be like 30 to 40 below up there. And I break tree line, and I start walking, and I realize very quickly, like, there's like a 99% chance that this just doesn't happen. But I said, let me see how it goes. Let's see how getting up Lafayette goes. But I knew that once you get a little further away from the Skookumchuck, your bail route is now past Greenleaf. And I didn't feel good about bailing past Greenleaf because that's really exposed to the wind.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm pushing up, ducking behind rocks to take breaks. I'm getting blown by the wind. I'm like fumbling. And I realized in 10, 15 minutes, I realized there's no way that this is happening in these conditions. And I turn around, go down the Skookumchuck, and head into the hostel that I'd booked for the night to just regroup, because I had two options there. I had pitch my tent somewhere and ride it out and go over the next day, or just get into town and take a second, because this stretch has already been like really, really, I mean, I had gone through the 15 below, the blizzard, like all that. It was really intense. So I just made the call to come down into town, knowing I'm going to have to come 3,000 feet back up and do it. But I made that call.
Smart. You have to.
Yeah, I had to.
Yeah, you can't play around.
And then as far as so you get into town, how do you reconnect to the trail? Are you sort of like religious about like, I have to reconnect where I started, or would you just go up Old Bridle and go down to where you left it and then come back up? Or how does that work when you have to bail like that?
Right. So I thought about it. I was like, okay, well, should I come up Old Bridle and come down and reconnect? And I was like mapping it out, and I realized with how far down I was going to come, like towards like north off Lafayette to go back up over it to reconnect my footsteps, I realized it was just easier to come back up the Skookumchuck. So that's what I did. So the next day I actually slack packed it. So, because it was supposed to be still super windy, and I was like, I got to climb 3,000 feet back up. And I was like, I'm just going to do this in one day.
That makes total sense.
Drop a lot of my overnight gear. Yeah. And I was so glad that I did, because it made the climb so much faster, right? I'm used to carrying a 60-pound bag. I got 20 pounds on my back now, just winter day hiking stuff. I flew up the ridge. And then when the wind was slamming me on the ridge, I don't have a 60-pound bag on my back anymore. It's all closed and tight up, and it's 20 pounds. So I didn't get blown around so much. So it made going over the ridge feel much more comfortable and safer. And then I was able to do the ridge that day. It was much better. The visibility was good for the most part. Came down Liberty Springs and got back into the hostel. I stayed at the Notch.
Nice. Did you, at that point, so once you get through there and you're really looking at Moosilauke, and then, you know, the southern part of New Hampshire is no joke. I mean, Cube and Smarts and that whole area is still pretty rugged, but going into Vermont, did you feel like at that point, like, okay, I actually have this, like now it's just a matter of, you know, one foot in front of the other, and I'm really past the dangerous parts where the weather could completely throw everything off?
So that's where, I felt like once coming down off Moosilauke was a big win for me, like a huge milestone. I felt like I'd gotten past a lot of the stuff that really, really could throw a wrench, I felt like, in this whole thing. Or I guess could force me to work around sections, right? Working through the rest of New Hampshire was fine. You know, there were a lot of sections of unbroken trail, but there's nothing I hadn't dealt with before, and it was just sort of, okay, I've been here, I've been doing this is okay. And then Vermont, I think, could have had a lot more snow than it did when I went through. There was still a lot of unbroken snow, because what I learned is those people don't take the AT up those mountains in the winter. It's all unbroken trail. And Vermont kicked my butt. Vermont really kicked my butt in a totally different way than the whites in Maine did. But I never felt like Vermont was really hard and really intense, but it wasn't intense like the Presidentials or Franconia Ridge or the Mahoosics were, right? It wasn't this intense where I was like afraid. It was this intense where I was like, this is just difficult and I must get through it. It's just exhausting me. There was thick snow. There was an ice storm that bent all the trees over the trail, and I couldn't find the trail. I was losing the trail all the time because the blazes are spaced out, and I'm like kicking and clawing and crawling through these frozen trees, and it was still pretty cold.
Oh, man.
And at this point also, I think this is about like the 2-month mark almost. I'm wiped. Like my head, my mental energy is really depleted, and I was having a really hard time pushing.
How close did you come to bailing, or at what point did you come the closest to just saying, like, I'm not going to keep going?
Vermont. I never really was like, I think I might need to quit. That never entered my head, but I wondered how much longer I could keep doing this. I was like, I really seriously looked at it and I was like, I don't know how much longer my body and mind can take this beat down.
What do you think? What is it about, like, just in general, like, you've seen enough through hikers at this point, and you know, I've never done one, so I can't speak from experience, but like, you see people, I think they say 1 out of every 5 people that starts a through hike finishes. And what is it? What's the characteristic of the people that actually finish? Like, is there something that is there a pattern or a mental sort of setup that is a telltale sign, or is it just too hard to figure out?
It's kind of hard to pin down. So know that, take my answer with the biggest grain of salt, right? But there's one thing I'll say right off the bat. I always said it takes a lot of luck to through hike. Somebody I met on the trail this year, a professor, said, I don't know if it takes a lot of luck, but you need to avoid bad luck. There's a lot of bad luck you need to avoid. So that right off the bat. But then I think it really comes down to you need to be able to, even when things are really hard and bad, if you can still find those small, beautiful spots, those small victories within that, people who've been able to do that always seem to be able to get their spirits back faster, because that's what'll kick you off the trail, is when the trail really, when 8 straight days of rain come in and you just lose that drive and that vision of why you're out there and the beauty of the trail. And constantly reminding yourself to look for those things, even in those hard moments on those tough days. Like, that ice storm that gave me such a rough time in Vermont, the ice was beautiful. It was awesome. It was so cool to see. And every once in a while I'd have to remind myself, like, this might be really slowing me down and really pushing me, but it's really beautiful, and I'm also out here for a good challenge, and this is just what happens. So having that mindset of just being able to roll with it, I think helps a lot. You see that in a lot of through hikers, and that's a big one.
That was really well said, though. I mean, even just yesterday doing the captain, the second you hit that landmark or that milestone, like, oh, I'm out. This is great, or you're over that hurdle. It's great, but I can't even imagine dealing with blowdowns. I mean, the way you describe Vermont is incredible. Was it just describe the terrain a little bit, because it sounds, I can't imagine anything harder than, say, like the stretch on the Kinsmans, or the Mahoosics. What was it about Vermont, like, geographically, that was different? Or was it just the snow? Was it just...
It was the snow and ice storm that really, I think, did me in, mentally and physically. So Vermont, the terrain, the climbs, some of the climbs are big. They're big climbs. You can do a lot of ups and downs, but it's never quite as steep as the Whites or as rugged as the Whites. There are a few spots, but for the most part, it's just, you're not going to find that in Vermont. On the AT, on the long trail, you'll find it, but on the AT in Vermont, it's not really there.
Yeah.
But what happened to me was, I woke up one morning and the snow started to fall, and I think where I was that morning got like a foot or maybe a little more, and then by the end of the day, where I'd gotten to, they had gotten like 8 inches and then like an inch and a half of or an inch of ice. So that ice was sitting on the snow. And so when I stepped on it, the ice broke and I punched in through the snow, and like everything buckled with every step. So I wasn't walking, I was stepping one step at a time. So it's moving really slowly, and it was really tiring on my legs. And then the further south I walked, there was less snow, but now I wish there was more snow because the ice had bent all the trees together and they all bent over the trail and then iced together. So I would stand in spots where it was 270 degrees of just an icy web of trees. I couldn't see a blaze. I couldn't see anything. You know, it was really mentally exhausting. And so the climbs weren't so bad. You're still going up and down and it's tiring. But now the challenge has shifted to something totally different. To get up on Bromley, I had to crawl 30 feet under a bunch of icy trees and just crawl into the snow, getting ice all over my face and everything. You know, it wasn't very steep like the top of a summit in the Whites would be, but there was a completely different challenge there.
Were you using mile markers for psychological boosts? Like, you know, you have a note here on Instagram, February 5th, you were 500 miles and 2 months in. Like, were you using 500 miles as a boost just to get pushing?
100%. I was like 500 miles. Like, that's a solid chunk of this trail. I was like, you know, I had to hang on to things like that because they really helped me remind myself every day. You wake up and you're like, if you had that thought inside your head of like, I can't do this, it's like you have 500 miles proving you can. So, you know, remember that.
Amazing.
Remember that. Yeah.
And for the listeners, how many miles total for the AT?
The AT this year was 2,194.3. So it's just shy of 2,200 miles.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah. So that's the other daunting thing was I was like, I'm 500 miles in. I was like, cool, 1,700 miles to go there, buddy.
Now, after you leave New England or the northern portion of New England, how about telling us some of the highlights of some of the lower states, New York, you know, anything that may have stood out to you during that time?
Right.
Shenandoah, any of those?
Right. So, yeah, I got out of my snowshoes in northern Massachusetts, and that was the last time I had them on over Greylock. So I swapped my gear in Massachusetts. My pack got lighter. Things got warmer. I saw more people out on day hikes and weekend hikes. The snowpack thinned out, and I had a really good time. New York and New Jersey were beautiful. I had a friend come out and see me. A couple friends come out and see me in Connecticut and hike with me for the day. Pennsylvania I enjoyed because in Pennsylvania you just hike on these ridges for a lot of the day, and then you dip down and come back up. And there were no leaves on the trees. I saw every sunrise and every sunset. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And then the southern states, Virginia, my favorite part of Virginia is just south of Shenandoah. You're hiking in these mountains. It's like the area where the priests by rock all the way through to like Apple Orchard Mountain and like the Three Ridges. I love that whole area. It's just a lot of big vistas. When you get a view, it's this big grand vista, and the mountains have these beautiful ripples on them for where you can see the water wearing out the mountains on the side. And the shadows you get at the beginning and end of the day are gorgeous. At this point also, I'm starting to run into, you know, 1 or 2 thru hikers a day, 3 to 4 thru hikers a day. It's ticking up a bit more. The Grayson Highlands were pretty, the Roan Highlands were pretty, the Smokies were stunning this time around.
So this is roughly what, April?
Most of this is through late March and April. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Middle to southern Virginia all the way through.
Okay, so the snowshoes are gone. The tent's gone, yes? Are you hammocking at this point?
Yep.
Okay, so how heavy is the pack?
So the pack was probably 35 plus pounds from Massachusetts to like somewhere in Pennsylvania, where I swapped out a bit more gear. The nights, it got way warmer at night. At that point, like I stopped getting nights in like the single digits and stuff. And then it got warmer, and then I actually weighed my pack for the first time right at the end of the trail, and with food and water I was right under 30 pounds, so less than half of what I was carrying. Gotcha.
So on my notes here, I have 4-month mark, April 5th, 1,500 miles completed. How many miles a day were you doing at this point, roughly? Were you upping the mileage?
Oh, 100%. So the first 2.5 months I averaged under 9 a day. And the last 1,000 miles I averaged about 21 a day.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 500 I averaged a little over 22 a day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did you experience any injury on trail or anything that impeded your movement?
I can say that without jinxing myself now. I did not.
I find that amazing.
But no, I got really lucky. I think it was a combo of things. I think the weather and the heavy pack and the terrain up north forced me to start really slowly. And then once I got that pack off, it became a lot easier on my body. I also, having through hiked before, I felt like my body jumped into it a lot faster.
Incredible. All right. So let's see, we're coming close to the end here. So April 15th, you're in Tennessee. April 20th, you have 400 miles left. Was there that must be exciting. Was there a point where you were like, I got this? Like, were you getting cocky at any point, or did you sort of dial that back and not even think in those terms?
No, everything was, if I make it, I feel good today. Like, if and when I might finish, I never counted my chickens. Like, you take 5 million steps on a hike like this.
Yeah.
And you can end your hike with one step, right?
It's so true.
One bad step to end a hike. And so as much as I got over Mount Greylock and I felt like I was 80% of the way there, but you're not there until you stand on Springer Mountain for me, right?
Yeah.
But I also, back to what I started with that expectations in my head, was I had gotten a lot out of this adventure, and if I got injured with 300 miles to go and I couldn't finish, I was not going to let that take away from the adventure I'd had. Right. And I really believe that, this trail may start and end on Springer Mountain and Katahdin, whichever way you go, but putting the trail in that box is hindering it's if you put your adventure in that box, you're limiting yourself. I think, the adventure is so much more, whether it goes further than those mountains or it's somewhere, anywhere in between. I really believe that. And so, yes, of course I would have been disappointed and I wanted to reach Springer, but if something happened where I couldn't, I like to think, that I would have still been able to look back and be really proud of what I did and not let it impact that in that way.
When you got down south, I'm assuming at some point you started to see some of the northbound through hikers. What was that like?
It was crazy.
Were you like, I got a story for you guys?
It was crazy. So I ran into so many folks. There were like 3,300 registered people who started the trail this year. Like, I counted one day, I saw 150 northbounders in a day. It was nuts, and it was so rejuvenating. I was seeing through hikers. We all reeked. We all were out there in the rain, like just somebody to bond with in that way. And it was also funny because some people were like, yo, I was watching your videos before you left. And then they ran into me and they're like, are you Scott? I was like, yes. And they're like, dude. So that happened a handful of times, and it was always really fun because I was like, no way. And they're like, you're crazy.
Yeah. And you start seeing trail magic and you're like, oh my God, this is like a luxury. Like, I was really roughing it. You guys have no idea.
Oh, every day I would stop and smile because it wasn't cold. Every day, every single day. If I took a break and got to sit there and not shiver, or if it was just sunny, every single day, I was really grateful for that southern part of the trail.
When I was doing the script, the thing I was thinking about the most is I was like, I would imagine the day that you swapped out your boots for trail runners was probably the best day.
I was going to ask that.
That was
like, when did that happen?
I did. That happened just south of the Hudson River, like right at the Hudson River. I swapped out my boots for trail runners, and it was funny because I checked the 10-day forecast. This was like late February, and I checked the 10-day forecast, and I was like, I don't see a storm in the forecast. I see no snow. Like, we're going into the trail runners. And I said to myself, I was like, watch, in 2 weeks I'm going to get blasted with snow. And I did get a few snowstorms, but nothing more than like 4 to 6 inches was the worst one. That melted pretty quickly. So I made the call to switch at the right time. But yeah, it was so much better. Putting them on in the morning when it's cold is easier than the boots. And they're lighter, and I'm more agile, and they fit my feet really well. It was great.
Yeah, I can imagine, because that was the thing that stood out to me, is that like once you can get, because it's top of mind for me because I just did this hike, and it was the first hike I did without boots, and I could wear trail runners, and I was like, this is fantastic. So, how is your sort of mental state around transitioning back into, and I know we talked a little bit before we recorded around the fact that, you know, you've been resting a lot and adjusting, but can you talk a little bit about the sort of adjusting back into normal civilian life once you step off the trail? Right.
So when I finished in 2019, I had no plans. I had no job interviews lined up. I didn't have an idea of what kind of job I was looking for. I had no plans even for I had no plans for after the trail. Literally zero plans. I came off the trail. I came home. I started looking for jobs. I sort of was just in this mishmash, lost void of space, just sort of figuring things out. And that really caused me a lot of trouble mentally. I went through a lot of post-trail depression, and I've struggled with my mental health for a long time. And I knew that coming off the trail in that way was not helpful. So this time around, I did a lot of work beforehand to make sure I had hopefully a smoother transition this time. So that was applying to grad school. I'm going to grad school this summer up in Vermont. I'm starting that. And so I have a clear direction that I'm going to. I'm studying to be a high school physics teacher, so I'm getting a teaching degree. So I have that lined up for the next year, and it's something to go do, and it's something else to go divert my energy towards. And I also have a little trip coming up with a friend. I'm flying out to Colorado and road tripping back across the country with my best friend. And so I have stuff like that lined up that's sort of breaking this all up and giving me stuff to do and giving me sort of somewhere to channel my energy. And I think that's going to help me a lot, because there's something really wonderful about waking up every day and having your goal be so clear. Like, I wake up and I follow those white blazes in this direction. Like, this is what I do, right? And to get up in the morning and be like, okay, like, I've got homework, I've got class, I've got A, B, and C to do today. Let's do it, right? I think that's going to help me a lot. And we'll see, because I definitely anticipate also like a letdown from all of this. There's nothing like being out and through hiking, you know, as hard as it may be. I never would rather be anywhere else on those hard days, but you know, these adventures have to end, and I have to learn how to transition out of them. And so this is just to me, this is just a continuation of the adventure. I actually got a really awesome message from a friend before I finished, and he said, when you stand on Springer, know that it might be, you know, I forget exactly what he said, but it might be the end of the journey, but it's also day one of something new. So yeah, keep that in mind. And that really helped. That really helped to hear.
Yeah. Listeners should know that Scott was kind enough to join us literally just off trail. I mean, you and I spoke via direct message. You had just finished, and you had just hopped onto a plane, and here you are the next day. And I mean, you're like still flying high from this whole adventure. So, I mean, it's pretty epic, and you know, just for you being here tonight is pretty cool. But you should check in with us in a couple months and give us an update as to see how you're doing and everything else.
Right.
You know.
Right. No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I stood on Springer Mountain 4 days ago.
It's epic.
I did a 24.5 mile day 4 days ago to get up to finish the AT.
crazy.
Wow.
Do you feel like you've milked the Northeast for everything? Because I worry about this too. Like, I think, like, you know, I've done the 4,000 footers and all these lists, and there's still plenty of areas I need to explore, but, you know, how do you keep it for, like, have you milked the Northeast for everything that you can milk it for, and you've got to get to another part of the country to really re-energize, or how do you think you'll keep it fresh with hiking?
I've got some good ideas. I've got so many ideas. Like my friends, you should hear that. I talk to them and they're like, "Are you kidding me?" And so, no, I think that's one of the beautiful things I think about the Northeast is so much stuff has been done, but there's still, I think, a lot of room to be creative and have fun. And
yeah,
that's what I love about these trails. And that's what I love about coming here in the winter is this is me being creative. I get to have a really fun time and do this in a unique way. And like on my birthday last year, I looked at the maps and I was like, this looks like a fun loop to do. Sandwich Dome, Whiteface, Paso Conway, and the Tri-Pyramids in a day. Like, let's just go do that, right? What does that look like? And getting creative like that, I think, is a lot of fun. And it doesn't always need to be harder or more intense or whatever it may be. It just needs to be something that speaks to me or you or whoever. And so I definitely have some ideas. But, you know, it's also something, it's a good note is that so much has been done in this area. Like, is it exhausted out? And I think, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm rambling, but I think a lot about on this hike. I thought a lot about like the idea of comparison, right? What has caused me a lot of trouble in the past is like, you know, if you tried to compare my journey to even someone else who did something similar, if you compare my journey to the Hiking Vikings or to Rich and Arlett's or to someone else, our journeys are incomparable, I feel, right? Like, to compare them would be to take away from both of our experiences. And so I think to go into these mountains with this idea that like, hey, maybe someone else has done this before, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to have my own journey, my own experience. And it's the time and the weather, and it's not to be compared with someone else. This is just a fun day out for me. This is just, I'm experiencing this for myself. And I think I've been trying to take that mindset into a lot of the things I do because, yeah, okay, a penny loop's been done a million times, or whatever big hike I want to do has been done so many times, but I'm still getting to experience it that day. And so to separate it and to leave it uncompared to how everyone else is doing it and to celebrate all those journeys, including mine, I think really allows us to get a fresh look at all of these mountains and all of these challenges and things.
Yeah. And I do worry about like, okay, have I been there and done that and with all of these different hikes? But then like last week we had Christina on and she was talking about the Jigger Johnson race that she shrunk together like this course from like South Moat to connect to Beer Notch Road down to Sawyer River out through Osseo. And I had never thought of like you could ever do that. So there is an infinite amount of different routes that you can take. So I've never been out to the Captain, so maybe I'll try that. Yeah. But that's good to hear that even like you've covered so much ground and you still feel like there's more to keep you busy.
Yeah. I think it's exciting, and this is one thing I've been doing in the Adirondacks too. Is I've been just going and hiking all the trails that I haven't touched that are in the middle of nowhere that see a lot less traffic. You know, maybe they don't have the most gain or the biggest view or what have you, but they're just enjoyable trails to be on. And this is sort of coming down the Skookumchuck Trail that day when I bailed off Franconia Ridge. It was a reminder, like, I was like, oh man, I'm not doing Appalachian Trail miles, but you know what? It's a beautiful day and I've never been on this trail before. And so I'm still out here hiking. I'm out here this winter to have fun and hike. And I'm still, you know, I'm not on the AT, but I'm still hiking. So I'm still having a good day, right? It's okay.
All right. Well, Stomp, this guy, he didn't get into this piece of it, but this guy hates bugs so much that he was like, I'm just going to do it in the winter. I don't care what I need to do. I'm going to do a winter Mahoozic just to avoid the bugs.
That's so great. I'm right there with you.
That was really nice. That was really nice. The bugs.
They're coming.
So we got to wrap up in a minute, but there's a couple of things that I did want to ask you about gear. So, and I've had this issue before. I've taken those like red propane tanks in my winter overnights, and I'm like, oh, it won't light, and I've like hung it over. I've like sort of dangled it over the fire that we had, and I'm like, I'll just warm up my canister a little bit to get it to like, but which is don't ever do that. But what did you do to actually have fuel work in crazy winter conditions?
I use an MSR Whisper Light International, so it's a liquid fuel stove that you can pressurize yourself. So as cold as it gets, it still works. Because what happens with those canister fuel stoves in the cold is it's a pressure thing. It gets so cold that the pressure inside isn't enough to force gas out to light. I believe that's what happens. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the white gas stove is just a fuel tank with white gas. You screw this pump onto it, you hook it up, and then you pump it. So you're pressurizing the whole system, and so there's enough of a flow where it still works. It still boils snow, water, 15, 20 below, whatever it may be. So it's a little heavier and a little clunkier, but that's what I did.
All right. Yeah, I'll check that out because I'm always kind of curious about the winter stove situation. I usually have my buddies deal with that. I'm like, you guys seem to know what to do. Just bring a stove. I'll mooch up.
If you're having trouble with those canisters in the cold, you have to put them in your jacket for like a little while before you cook with them. And then you have a limited time. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about like the worst situation you ever got in? Like, did you ever feel like, oh no, I might need a rescue here, or did you not worry about that too much?
If I ever thought that was going to happen, I ended up trying to divert it in some way so that it wouldn't happen. Right, like the Franconia Ridge situation. I was like, this could turn into something bad. I turned around. There was another situation where I had a lot of damp clothes. I was like 4 days into the stretch, and it was gonna be like 35 below in the Bigelows. I was like, I need to zero my tent. Like I can't go up there in these conditions with what I've got going on with all my damp clothes. So, the Washington waiting out the weather. So it was situations like that where if I felt uncomfortable or like I was going to be uncomfortable in that situation, I tried to avoid it. And I tried to have enough gear and food to always make sure I could work around that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And it's quite a story. You did an accomplishment. I don't even know. Do you even know how many people have done a southbound in the winter conditions? So
there's Rich and Arlette last year. Yeah. There's Jabba, the hiking Viking. There's a fella, Trauma. There's a guy, Trauma, he's the guy who also he was one of the two people who did the PCT that winter. I believe he's done the southbound AT in the winter. I heard rumors from a couple folks while I was on this trail, from like hostel owners and such. I heard rumors of like one or maybe two other people in like the 90s or early 2000s coming through in the winter. Whether or not they made it, where they started, finished, I don't know. None of that I know, but I've heard about other things. So that's what I know. There may be more. I have no idea. I do know that this is something that gets very rarely attempted. The ATC describes it as a handful of people who've attempted this.
Yeah. And it's crazy because it's a mix of skill, knowledge of the area, luck with the weather, and then grit and determination. So it's everything's got to come together perfectly to make it happen.
And desire to do it, right? Like most people get on the Appalachian Trail to do a thru hike, and they're not looking for this experience. They're not looking to feel overwhelmed every day like this. Like they want the social experience. They want the AT going northbound. They want the good weather, and they want to watch spring happen in that way. And I get that, and that's why the trail's beautiful. Is both of those experiences can happen on the same footpath, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. So congratulations.
Congrats.
Did we miss anything?
No, that was a great episode. Thank you so much, Scott. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Get some rest.
Thank you for having me.
Get some rest, and we want to check in with you again. I get a sense that you've got some crazy ideas, so I want to keep in touch, and we'll hear about your adventures this summer.
Yeah. Stay in touch. I'll be in the whites.
Drop us a line anytime, okay?
Yeah. Awesome.
Definitely.
Thank y'all so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered in today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information at slasherpodcast.com. That's SLASR podcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until then, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some mega peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words to describe this race. Do we all know what they are? Only one hill!
Here's Lieutenant James Neeland, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got